Hey everyone, welcome back to the Engineering Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm recording this as of October 13th, 2023. My voice is still not there, but I'm going to get that fixed in a few months and then won't be quite as raspy. So bear with me. We'll just do all the background stuff. So as you guys know, I'm sure by now, I run CADdesignhelp.com. Go to the website, sign up on the email list, and when you do, we'll send you a free PDF, the top 4 mistakes inventors make, and then you'll also be kept updated on all the news, like podcast releases. Go leave me a review on iTunes or whatever podcast app you use, and if you have any feedback, you can reach me info at CADdesignhelp.com. Our guest this week is Greg Lambrecht. And Greg is the inventor of the Coravin wine preservation device, as well as some other things, but that's what we'll mostly talk about today. Greg, why don't you tell us first just about you, your background, your training, like what you do for a living, all that kind of stuff, like what you do now, and then we'll go more into like Coravin and how that came to be and all the details.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. I'll start at the beginning. I was born in New York, moved out to California to go to high school, fell in love with wine, probably illegally. So when I was 16 and my friends brought me up to Napa Valley to taste my first wine because I looked older. Went to college, went to MIT twice, undergraduate in nuclear engineering and physics, worked on plasma fusion, had a short career in Japan where they were developing the hardest part of the fusion reactor. That's the kind of nuclear reactor that doesn't yet work. Realized that wasn't going anywhere. And so came back, studied at MIT again, mechanical engineering, master's, and got interested in biomedical engineering, got a sort of a consulting job with J&J when I was still in grad school and invented a peripheral IV catheter. It's the first thing that goes into your arm or your hand when you're brought into a hospital. It's a tube to allow them to put in fluids or draw blood. And so I got excited by the potential to improve people's lives through medicine. And I got hired by Pfizer and was hired to invent new medical therapies for them, which I did for 5-6 years. I invented 24 different medical devices, then left and started my own companies. One of them being Coravin. So I'm a sort of a serial entrepreneur. I've had 3 medical device companies, one now that works in spine surgery and the other 2 sold. And I've got Coravin, which is sort of my passion. It's my quality of life company.
That's interesting. You said that you were hired to invent stuff. I've never heard of anybody being hired to invent anything before at any kind of company. So that's the first I've ever heard of that.
Pfizer was really innovative at the time, and I had an incredible first boss in the United States, a guy named Josh Mackauer, who's a walking company. He's an undergraduate in engineering. He's got a business degree. He's got a medical degree. And he had this theory that invention could be scheduled. And instead of just sort of a light bulb popping off in somebody's head at random, he thought, the best thing would be to develop a process to invent useful, valuable new technologies in medicine. And so he and I worked on developing that program while we were at Pfizer, used it to invent new medical therapies while there. He now has started 8 or 9 different companies, sold a couple of them for more than $1 billion. Now he teaches at the biodesign program, which is the process we developed over at Stanford.
I'd like to hear more about this, how you can schedule invention, because I've never heard of this. I want to learn a little more about that before we jump into Coravin.
Yeah, it's fundamentally the belief of this program that made it so successful was that the key to a new invention is not necessarily a new technology, but more likely a new perspective on the unmet need or the problem. And so, the basic idea of these medical invention programs was to take people that were skilled in engineering, put them together with somebody from marketing, leave them in a hospital in a particular field of medicine, let's say cardiac surgery or cardiology, and sort of intern almost with that specialty for a month just watching surgeries, watching clinic, watching patient outcomes, looking for the biggest problems. And I think one of the keys to the success of the program was that we brought in people that didn't have medical training or had never worked in that particular field. And so they had the opportunity to be shocked by what was accepted as normal by medical practice. And so we spent a month identifying unmet needs. We spent another month screening those needs to the ones that were most valuable to Pfizer. And then we spent the last month of a 3-month program inventing solutions to that unmet need, filing patents, putting together a business plan. It was really an extraordinary period in my career, and I now use that to start my own companies, including Coravin.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. So yeah, if you want to invent something, I guess you need to pick. If unless you want it to come to you randomly, let's say you just want to invent something for whatever reason, financially, you could just pick a problem, probably pick some subject, right? Like, and then just observe what is happening. Like, let's say you're really into shopping at grocery stores, and you just sit in the grocery store and watch what happens and see if there's some type of inefficiency that could be solved. I mean, that's just an example, but that's kind of what I got from what you were saying.
That's exactly right. And I think the thing that I take it as a practice is when I'm experiencing a problem, or a family member is experiencing, or a friend is experiencing some sort of medical problem, I study it briefly, and then I try to figure out what are the different ways of characterizing the nature of the problem that they're suffering. And there's frequently a eureka moment when all these needs are written down in need statements in a simple partial sentence. It starts off with a way to do X without Y, some surgery without a complication or a big incision or some bad outcome. And there's a moment when you've written it down in 15 or 20 different ways where, if you're lucky, you hit one where you're like, oh, that's really the problem. And it's frequently that unique understanding of the unmet need that enables the invention of something valuable and new.
Yep, got it. All right, so Coravin, I guess let's start with, okay, we know that you're into wine. You told us about that, but let's start with what the problem is that needed to be solved.
It's wine's been around for 8,000 years. It's been in a glass bottle with some closure for the last 400 years.
Let's talk about why that is first before, why don't you just put it in a plastic jug?
Yeah, well, 400 years ago, no plastic, but
right. But nowadays,
plastic is permeable. And the acids and sugars that are inside of wine interact with different plastics in different ways, can eat through them. For example, liners and cans. The high acidity of wine, sometimes pHs of 2 to 3, can go through liners, interact with the aluminum, and create really off flavors. Plastics have a permeability. PET, which is an old plastic bottle, you'll see things are in plastic say best before, and so it allows oxygen to permeate through. It doesn't allow wine to evolve slowly over time. You have to remember that many wineries will hold on to their wine for 2-3 years before they release them, and some of those years in bottle. And so if it was plastic, they'd have to get it out the door right away, and that may not be the way that they want their wine to taste. So while cans are coming up and plastic bags are, bag and box is increasing, tends to be lower quality wine that can be sold quickly. But why cork and glass? I think it was an English glass blower in the southern coast of the UK. I mean, they used to import barrels of wine from Portugal and France and Spain, and they'd be bottled, or they would be distributed from the south of England. This bottler was like, hey, what if we fill these glass bottles with wine and then we close them with a cork? Cork is oxygen impermeable. Glass is completely oxygen impermeable. Both of them don't react with the materials that are in wine. And so it was an incredible discovery, the idea that you could put cork in glass and you could get wine to last for years. So, what was the problem that I ran into? I guess it's fundamentally from the fact that the volume of wine that's sold in a bottle happens to be the lung volume of a glass blower in the south of England in the 17th century, right? 750 milliliters is good when you've got friends over or people like the same wine. But if you just want to have a glass, it's, you pull the cork, you pour yourself a glass, and you've just exposed the rest of that wine to oxygen. Oxygen is not a friend of wine. As time goes on and the oxygen is absorbed into the wine, it turns brown, it can turn vinegary, it goes off.
So a couple of questions. Why not? I guess the first simplest one is why not just put a bottle of wine into like the same size as a bottle of beer so that you can just have that. It's just like one person, one serving.
Right. And you're foreshadowing our latest invention, but the fundamental problem has been the cost of the container is about constant. The closure is the same, so cork costs the same or screw cap costs the same. And even if you shrink the size of the glass down to a single serving, the cost of that bottle is about the same as a full size. And so from a winery standpoint, they get less margin from a smaller bottle. And, in the last 400 years, there's a lot of culture that has developed around the volume of sale, the 750 milliliter bottle. And so you'll also, smaller bottles tend to age faster than larger bottles. So wineries are loath to take some fraction of their annual production and predict how much they would be able to sell in smaller format versus larger format. So there are lots of inefficiencies in the system that exist now that sort of push wineries to keep it in this 750 milliliter format. But as a consumer, that's not always what you want. I mean, you go to wine bars, you can order wine by the glass. So what happened to me was I traveled a lot. I worked in medicine and worked in physics. My wife at the time didn't drink much wine. I fell in love with wine because of its variety. I mean, there's 140,000 different wines bottled every year. I loved exploring the world through the wines that were made in different places. My first wines were Californian, where I grew up, and then I fell in love with European wines when I was in college and after I got married. And I loved that variety, but I was stuck having to commit to a full bottle, half of which was frequently dumped down the drain. So I wanted to be able to learn faster about wine, learn at my own rate. And so I remember sitting at a table in my kitchen, writing down the need that I was experiencing. It was like a way to better preserve an open bottle of wine, because there are vacuums and sprays and all sorts of things that people have tried, but they still put you on a clock. You still have 2 to 3 days to drink that wine. I wanted to be able to come taste a wine and say, no, it's not the right wine. It's not ready yet. I'll drink it again in a year, or drink it again in 5 years. Or I wanted to be able to open 6 different bottles of wine, taste them side by side to learn, what a California Chardonnay is like, or a Burgundy Chardonnay is like, or an Oregon Chardonnay is like, and taste them side by side to learn fast. But I couldn't do that because of this volume of sale and this oxidation problem.
So if you open the bottle of wine and you put the cork back in, why does it not preserve it because it's not sealed as tight as when it was originally installed?
No, so if you open a bottle of wine and then put the cork right back in, actually it would last a really long time. The problem is that in order to get the wine out of the bottle, not only do you remove the cork, but you tilt the bottle sideways, wine goes out. Replacing that wine is air, so glug, glug, glug. As you're pouring into the glass, air is replacing the wine that's in the bottle. That air now fills the headspace. And even if you close the bottle with a cork, the wine in the bottle reacts with the air in the atmosphere that's now inside the bottle, and it oxidizes. The more wine you take out, the more air gets in.
So you would need like a device to pull a vacuum on it back to avoid this problem.
And that was the most popular wine preservation system used for the longest time. So it's a product called.
Oh, they did this. So people did do that. You would hook this up and you'd pull a vacuum on it, And I'm guessing that device that simultaneously would somehow put a cap back on it or cork back in it, because you need to do that quickly.
That's right. And yeah, and so the problem is nature hates a vacuum. And so this company, Vacuum, made these rubber stoppers you could stick into the top of the bottle, and had a valve at the top. You could pump away and suck out some of the atmosphere, but not all of it. And then the other problem was that, well, there were two other problems. One is the aroma. There are some dissolved gases that are frequently in wine. And so if you're applying a vacuum, you're sucking all those dissolved gases out of the wine. There's dissolved CO2, there's dissolved sulfur. And so the wine changes as a result of the vacuum. And so another technology that was developed was the spray can of argon. So argon's a noble gas. It doesn't have any known chemical reactions, and it's heavier than oxygen. And so these various companies came up with ways of basically spraying argon into the bottle after you poured the wine out, with the hope that that argon would at least lessen the interaction between wine and air in the bottle. And so those work a little bit better, last a couple of days without disturbing the gases on the inside, but they're not great at preserving the wine. The wine changes for sure each day that passes, and always for the worse. And so the limitations on consumers like me, the limitations on wine bars and restaurants, were that you'd use these technologies if you plan on drinking that bottle of wine over the next day or so. And then you would go to the next bottle of wine. In a restaurant, you wouldn't open expensive bottles. You'd serve inexpensive bottles where you could afford throwing away half. It's called wastage, and it's a huge problem in the restaurant industry, in the wine bar industry. So all of these limitations led me to that kitchen table where I was writing down, way to preserve better preserve an open bottle of wine. And then I remember writing down, I want a way to be able to drink or serve any amount of wine from any bottle I own, whenever I want, without having to think about when I'm going to drink it again. That's what I want. I wanted I remember writing a way to teleport wine out of the bottle into my glass. Leave the cork in place, just let the wine come out. And then I remember writing down a way to pour wine from a bottle without opening it. And I thought, if you never open it and you never let air get inside, then the cork is doing its job, the glass is doing its job. You can come back to drink that wine weeks, months, even years later. And that was the new perspective that enabled me to invent what is now Coravin.
So let's talk about that process. So now you tell us, you got a very good understanding of, all the options and things that were done. How did you, I guess, what was the first prototype, or where did you start? Just give us the whole story.
So the good news was that I worked in medicine. And so my dad had been a type 1 diabetic his entire life. So he had been taking insulin out of bottles with a needle and a syringe. And so I thought, the very first product I developed, that J&J thing, was a needle-based product. And then the first thing I developed at Pfizer was a chemotherapy delivery system that had an implant underneath the skin, and you would access it with a needle over and over again during the course of somebody's therapy to inject various chemotherapeutic agents. And so I got really good at making needles that went in and out of things without doing damage to them. And so I had this needle in my hand and a bottle of wine going, there has got to be a way I can get this wine out. And so I first thing I did was I took a syringe, I screwed the needle onto the front of the syringe, and stuck the long needle through the cork. This is a non-coring needle. It's a special kind of needle that doesn't remove material or clog up. It sort of pierces and dilates its way through a material, but it doesn't core it in any way. And so I got the needle through the cork, got into the wine, tried to suck the wine out, but of course, vacuum, it tried to suck the wine back. So I was like, okay, well, I can take a little bit out, but I can't take a glass or two glasses out. What if I inject an inert gas into the bottle, pressurize it, and have that gas push the wine out through the needle into my glass?
It's sort of like it's not Venturi effect's not the right word. It's like a siphon.
Yeah, siphon.
You're creating a siphon. Right, you're creating a siphon with this inert gas.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I basically inflate the bottle, although it doesn't expand. Inflate the bottle with 1.5 atmospheres of gas, and
Yeah,
that
there's
pressure difference will
yeah,
drive the wine out of the bottle into my
right.
glass.
Exactly. You have a higher pressure on the inside versus the outside. So as soon as you give it an option to go somewhere, it's going to come out.
That's right. That's right. And so I took the needle, bought a canister of actually at the time I got 4 different gases. Helium, which was a lot of fun. I had a 3-year-old son. We breathed most of that, but it's a noble gas. So helium, nitrogen, argon, and carbon dioxide. Um, Nitrogen and argon have argon has no chemical reactions. Nitrogen only has 3 in the atmosphere, I believe, and none of them really involve wine. And also actually nitrogen, argon, and carbon dioxide are all used by wineries to push wine around inside the winery, as well as to clear the bottle before they fill it with wine, and before they cap it. So I knew those would be reasonable gases, and I started to experiment with different needles, different needle sizes, those 3 different gases, different pressures, to drive the wine out. I didn't want to push the cork out, but I did want to push the wine out. So I had to find a pressure that was low enough not to remove the cork, but high enough to pour a glass pretty quickly. And came up with my first good prototype in 1999. It sort of worked and allowed me to change a few things. I got a really good prototype in 2003. This was just a hobby. So I had my day job. I was running it for medical companies. But I started to make some refinements. Coravin in the end is a simple handheld system about the size of a paperback book. It's got a thin hollow needle that pierces the cork. It's got a trigger that allows you to insert the gas into the bottle. That pressure is controlled by a regulator, a dual stage regulator that keeps the pressure within 1 psi of our target pressure. And then that pressure pushes the wine out of the bottle through the needle into your glass. You then pull the needle out, and the beauty of cork is it's one of the most elastic solids on the surface of the earth. So the same way it's sealing against the glass on the inside of the neck of the bottle, it closes the hole that we make when we pierce it.
So there's likely a tiny bit of oxygen or something getting in there, but it's so minuscule due to this process that it doesn't even matter, really.
You can get it down darn near 0. The only place that it can get in is the needle. So the needle, when it's sitting out in the open, can have a little bit of air in it, but it's a pretty small needle. And then you can also solve that problem by priming the system with argon, by giving the trigger a quick press before you push the needle through. Then no oxygen.
Oh, so argon was the final gas that you decided to use.
It was the best gas. Interesting why. Helium left the bottle so fast it would suck air in, so that did not work. When you tip the bottle back up, so you pierce the needle with the system, tip it sideways so that the wine is touching the needle. You press the trigger, gas goes in, the wine comes out. You then tip it back up to vent any extra gas before you pull the needle out. With helium, all the gas would leave and air would get sucked back in, so it didn't work. Nitrogen, argon, and carbon dioxide all worked. The problem with nitrogen and carbon dioxide is that they dissolve in a fluid. They essentially carbonate or nitrogenate the fluid and make it slightly bubbly. Guinness beer is nitrogen bubbles, for example. Very small, fine bubbles, and the rest of most beers.
Well, I mean, that could be an option for people that like that.
Oh yeah. If you want to change your wine, we had nitrogen capsules for a while in Japan because they wouldn't let us sell argon.
You should make that an option. For people that want to mix it up.
Yeah, different gases, a little bit of spritz. Yeah. Like you can blend argon and CO2.
What would happen if you did that?
You get a little bit of spritz, right? And so we've had some wineries ask us for that because they have a lot of dissolved CO2. It's not a sparkling wine, but they have some dissolved CO2 in their wine, and they were hopeful that we could make a blended gas. Argon is so good across the board that we just sort of stuck with it.
Cool. So, once you've finished the final version, what did bringing it to market look like?
Yeah, it took me 11 years to finish the thing, I wanted to make sure that a bottle that I Coravin today would be indistinguishable from another bottle from the same wine 5 years from now. And so I started these 5-year tests with wines from all over the world and wines of different vintages to make sure that I had like the broad spectrum of different varieties of wine covered. So 1999 to 2010, raised a round of financing, small round from friends that were investors in my medical companies, launched the company in 2011, hired an unbelievable CEO and engineering team, run by, Nick Lazaris was the CEO, and this guy, Mike Ryder, who was the VP of R&D. He had built a lot of what Polaroid had built. He was working at the time at iRobot, running a lot of consumer product development for them. An absolute genius and great manager. And so he took my prototype and turned it into a real product with a team that he hired. Took us 2 years from 11 to 13 to launch. So I'd made 15 different iterations in my own home, making it gradually easier to use as I was giving it to friends to use and give me feedback. And then we made another 8 in between 2011 and 2013 until we got to the final design, and then launched in 2013. I'd been lucky to meet one of the most important wine figures in history, a guy named Robert Parker, who rated wines around the world. And he's well known for never taking money from companies and never doing anything promotional. And I luckily met him and showed him the Coravin, and he loved it so much he put us on a video together, invited me to his house, and so when we launched, we wound up selling out in a couple of days. It's crazy.
So no Kickstarter. Maybe Kickstarter didn't exist back then, but this sounds like a perfect product to go to Kickstarter with.
It would have been. I would have done Kickstarter, I think. We just put up an email list and sold a couple thousand before we launched.
This was what, 2013?
13 July. Yeah, it's our 10th
anniversary. I feel like Kickstarter wasn't quite there yet. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't.
If it was, it was real early.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So did you kind of do it like Kickstarter, where you offered it like for a pretty like low price with that first like push, I guess, the email list, or was it just like, hey, here's like, this is what we're going to sell at retail, or were you selling it online, or did you have a distributor?
Yeah, it varies by country. So we're now in 60 countries. We've served 250 million glasses of wine in the last 10 years, sold millions of devices, and our biggest country is the United States. So when we launched first in the US. We launched online through our own website, through Amazon, through wine stores like Total Wine and Spirits and small local wine stores, and then also through retail. So Best Buy, Williams-Sonoma, Sur La Table, those kind of places, Neiman Marcus, Bloomingdale's, Macy's. So it was a real mix. And then we had 4 different kinds of customers. We had consumers, 2 big blocks, consumers in the trade. So people like me just wanted to drink a perfect glass of wine. And if their wife wanted or spouse wanted a different wine, they could now pour them what they wanted. And when friends came over, they could serve them whatever they wanted, not just what was open. So it really made sort of your house into a wine bar. This small handheld thing, you can serve any wine by the glass, or by the taste or whatever you want. So we had consumers we had to reach. And in the US, there's 36 million people who drink all the wine. And so the big problem in consumer is, how do you get at those people efficiently without spending a ton of money? And so what we realized was the other parts of the industry could help us sell to the consumer and make the consumer aware. So wineries used us in Napa and Oregon and Washington in their tasting rooms. So people would come in and taste wines. They wouldn't necessarily open the bottle. They could just taste them across 10 or 15 different wines and not have to throw any of the wines away because they were all still covered.
Oh, right. Right. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
so people, it's,
you might even just give it to the winery because it's worth just, having them use it for,
we did.
yeah.
We,
You just say, hey, we'll give it to you. All you got to do is make sure you tell the people drinking it, tell them,
yeah,
show them how it works.
that's it. And so it's very important for us before we launch in the country that we went to the wineries because ultimately we use our product on theirs. So we didn't want them to see it in a restaurant or in somebody's home for the first time and go, "What the heck is that that you're using on my wine?" So we did a lot of the testing early on with them, and then they started to use it a lot. They still do, and then showed it to restaurants and wine bars. So before we launched, we gave it to restaurants in New York and San Francisco to try and to break it so that we could fix it before we launched. And those restaurants changed their wine by the glass program dramatically and started to offer pretty much anything by the glass. Some restaurants offer hundreds of wines by the glass now, or 15, 20 different.
Yeah, they start with the cheaper wines in case it doesn't work like you said it was going to, and then over time they'll keep expanding it because they don't want to open the $20,000 bottle of wine
That's
to
right.
pour glass and have it go bad a week later. But once they've seen it work, they're willing to take that risk.
We did before we launched. Yeah. We did a bunch of blind tastings with the sommelier from around the world, so that we would Coravin a bunch of bottles from a case, but not all of them. Then we'd come back at 3 months, 6 months, and a year to blind taste them together. And so we had already convinced the restaurants that it worked, but just because they were convinced that it worked didn't mean that they were willing to change behavior, right? That's one of the interesting things about Coravin is that it enables all sorts of new behaviors. Instead of opening a bottle or selling a bottle, you can sell a glass or sell a half glass or sell 3 different glasses, like people get beers, right, in small amounts to taste across a range of beers in a restaurant. We wanted to do the same thing with wine, and so, but that behavior had never existed before, not really.
Yeah, why doesn't beer have this problem, like this preservation problem, I guess?
Yeah, beer's got a couple of advantages. First, it does well in can, right? It's not high acid, and so it doesn't eat through the liner. Beer in can is great. Beer bottles as well with a cap, right? Also, people don't age beer. They don't. I did. I make beer too. I love making beer, and you can age beer a couple of years, and it tastes different than the day you made it. But that's not a tradition, right? And then beer sold on tap. There's some wine on tap, but I think I'm not sure why wine on tap didn't take off more than it should have. It's not as easy to do at home, but in the restaurant situation, it seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Let's see. So we're about 40 minutes in. So want to get a little bit towards wrapping up. I did want to talk about patents a little bit because this seems like a pretty innovative product that you would want to patent, and I believe that you got them. Can you tell us about the process there, and then if there's anybody that's trying to infringe, and you have to try to take them to court? Because this seems like something that somebody could copy pretty easily. It's not super complicated, but you don't want any competition. It's the whole point of the patent.
Yeah, patents matter, and I was lucky. I think coming from the med tech business, patents are part of what you do. And so when I was at Pfizer, I met this incredible guy named Jack LaPierre, and he taught me how to patent things. I wound up hiring an extraordinary patent firm, Kenobi Martins, out in California for one of my medical device companies, and met some extraordinary people there who refined my understanding of how to claim things and patent things. And so I was pretty familiar at filing patents when I started filing patents for Coravin. And luckily, I was first to invent. Actually, I ran into one patent I had to argue with the patent office about, which was really funny. I was living in this town in Natick, Massachusetts, and I filed this patent, and they came back and said, it's not patentable over this guy. This guy's patent from 1903 is too close. And so I look at this patent, and it's kind of a crazy idea. It's a big needle. You thread through the cork. I'm not sure why. And then you pumped air in to push the wine out. I don't know why air. You can just open it and pour. But it turns out this guy from 1903 that I had to argue about lived 100 meters from my house. I mean, he long dead, but where his address is 100 meters from where I live. And I was like, is this just a wine inventing street? Is this what?
That's a crazy coincidence.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't make any sense, but
yeah. But we got our broad claims, essentially passing a needle through a cork, removing wine using an inert gas, and then removing the needle in the cork resealing. So we have not had anybody try to infringe. And we've had a couple of people that try to copy our argon capsules, and we've been able to shut them down pretty quickly because our patents are broad and many.
yeah, cool. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, the last two questions I got for you. What is your number one tip for the audience? Because you got a lot of experience in inventing and creating things. What would you say your number one tip is?
Number one tip, I always give two. One is the best inventions come from that unique understanding of the unmet need. And the other is the difference between an inventor and an entrepreneur. And it's important to figure out which one you are. An inventor wants to create something brand new. An entrepreneur wants to use that invention to change the world. If you're an inventor, you need to figure out how to license your stuff to somebody who wants to use it to change the world. If you're an entrepreneur, it's a great life. It's completely absorbing. It's hard to maintain a family, but outside of that, it's an extraordinary experience.
Cool. And then if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
Best way, Greg at Coravin. That's GREGATCORAVIN, all one word. That's my Instagram and my Twitter or X. Feel free to connect with me there.
So Greg at Coravin.com.
Greg at Coravin, not Greg at Coravin.com. Greg at Coravin on Instagram.
Oh, okay. So Greg at symbol Coravin.
No, AT. Greg AT Coravin.
Oh, okay, not the symbol. Okay. So you want people to go to either Instagram or Twitter or X?
Yeah, DM me.
Got it. Okay, I'll just write it down.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks, Greg, for coming on, and I guess we'll catch everyone next time on the podcast.
I'm really looking forward to it. Get better.